podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Find the biggest voices in sport on the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Like the Football for Kids podcast with me, Darren Rees, where kids get to learn about their favourite players, teams, trophies and more. The podcast where kids are inspired, educated and motivated through the thing which they love. Search Football for Kids and listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
Find the biggest voices in sport on the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Like Not the Top 20 podcast with me, George Elliott.
And me, Ali Maxwell.
Join us on our podcast about the best football leagues in the world, the EFL. Want football to be like it was back in the day? No VAR and so much drama. Search Not the Top 20 and listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn and welcome to How We're the podcast, and you join us as we look forward to a Premier League top of the table clash that we're involved in. We've watched plenty of these over the years where the top clubs play each other over a weekend, and I'm fairly sure Sky Sports wouldn't have guessed that mid-November would have given them their first of the season, and they certainly wouldn't have guessed that it would have involved Sunderland, but here we are. And of course Arsenal are the visitors to the Stadium Light for a 5:30 kick-off. And luckily for us, we have someone who you may know from writing in The Observer or The Guardian in the past, and is now the Athletic's Arsenal reporter, as well as having authored a number of books about Arsenal, including 89, which runs through that epic title win at Anfield, of course, because we are very pleased to have author and journalist, and maybe more importantly, huge Gunners fan, Amy Lawrence. Hello, Amy.
Hi, Chris. Well, a lovely welcome. Yeah, definitely more importantly, let's be honest. I remember when I first started off doing this remarkable gig, and people used to say to me, "How do you manage to be both? How do you stay from being biased? There was this kind of mystique about how difficult it would be to sort of at once be a fan and be a professional writing about the game." And there was always two things that I thought were critical. The first of which was like, ultimately, whatever your emotional investment, when you've got a job to do and a deadline to do, you've got to do it right. And if you don't, there's so much pressure and adrenaline that overtakes. Not completely, but I mean, it's dominant, let's be honest. And the second thing is, I always said, if I stop feeling like a fan when I go to games with my mates in my season ticket, then that's the time to give up journalism, because I know what means the most to me.
Well, you started, from what I read, you started writing for an Arsenal fanzine back in the day.
That's right, yeah. There's a fanzine called The Gooner, which amazingly is still going. The heyday of fanzines is difficult to explain to the younger generations because life has changed so much. But in the kind of late 80s and early 90s, when fanzines were a fundamental part of how you connected with your football club and indeed with the game as a whole. And I used to love going to games and picking up a fanzine of the opposition team always, because it gave you a much better idea of like the vibes at another football club than anything you might read in the papers or hear on the TV or on the radio. But of course, we just had so much less information, pre-internet. And at a time when there was a minuscule amount of football on TV or in the papers, so you had getting a real sense of what Joe Public thought of what was going on at their team was so refreshing. It was so exciting and interesting, and it kind of tapped into the times. Football was recovering from the hooliganism era. It was a difficult time to be a football fan and be proud of the sport, because the sport was getting hammered by people who didn't know anything about it, because they saw people smashing up cities and running around behaving in a horrible way. So being able to kind of connect with why you love your team and why you love the sport was really invigorating. And there was a shop in Charing Cross Road called Sports Pages in the middle of London, which was full of fanzines from all over the country. And, you used to be able to go in there and browse, in the way that again, doesn't feel very modern in the way that people shop today online or whatever. But just going and having a look at what was around, and definitely remember I Love Supreme from those days being, an important fanzine from Sunderland. And some of them had just such brilliant names as well. But there's only one F in Fulham, Brian Moore's Head, Gillingham. It was happy times. And what also was great was, I suppose, in a way that kind of connects with the fact that now someone can do a podcast or a vlog or a Substack or, stuff on TikTok or Snapchat or whatever. Here's my day out at the football. In those days, the only way as a fan that you could express yourself beyond the person who was standing next to you was really through a fanzine. So it was a great opportunity for a young me in those days. It took me a while reading the fanzine to feel brave enough to try and write something. They always used to say, for the fans, written by the fans, read by the fans. Anyone out there that's got anything to say, send it in. Yeah. And one day I chose a really, really terrible game, thinking no one else in their right minds would write about that, and dared to scribble some stuff down. And I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw it was published in the next issue. There we go.
Yeah. I grew up with, of course, Love Supreme, but then there was an easy one for Norman. And and It's the Hope I Can't Stand was I think the
That's
top
very
three.
good. I like that a lot. I might borrow that.
Well, you mentioned, of course, working for the Athletic or for your team. So is that the dream job? Because to people like myself, who are, of course, failed sports journalists, it does seem like the absolute dream job.
That's a really good question. And I still wonder about that from time to time, because for the first 25 years or so of writing about football, I was writing about any football. And at times that is enormously beneficial. And you attend things that were really thrilling and incredible experiences, going to World Cups or going to, European games or going to finals or derbies, and traveling around the country, seeing different clubs is very refreshing. But, the benefit of when it's your own club is that you just automatically know everything there is to know. You are a nerd about your club, usually. And I do remember, certainly in the kind of latter stages of being a general football reporter rather than a specialist, that there would be occasions when I'd be sent to a club and I'd look at the team sheet and I'd think, who the hell's this? I'd never even heard of this bloke, And occasionally you'd either miss something that everybody knows, because if it's your team and someone's been out for a month and has had a problem, and them being back is a really big deal, and you don't know that because you're not following that team every day, you can seem like an idiot. And there's just not enough hours in the day to have in-depth knowledge of every team that you might cover. So the kind of fear of getting caught out for busking it a bit became a bit more of a thing, as, obviously so many players now, big, substitutes bench, so many transfers. It's hard to keep up with absolutely everybody. I mean, look at your club. Like, for someone who's not been paying attention, looks at the Sunderland team sheet and it's like, how many new signings? Who are all these people? Like, where did they all come from? So, having your own team, that you're in tune with what people are thinking. You're not going to drop a boo-boo by misunderstanding the relevance of a certain player or a certain goal or a certain injury, because you know it all anyway. So there's the comfort of it's your team. But if you do cover one club and that club's going through a bit of a mundane spell, then after a while you're like, I don't know what I'm going to write about now. I haven't got any new thoughts. So the freshness of going from different clubs and meeting different people is great. So I don't know if that's answered your question, but there's pros and cons to both.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I read that you started going in the late 70s, and I had to think about this, because I thought, well, in a roundabout sort of way, you probably grew up a big fan of Sunderland when you started going along to Arsenal games, because, of course, Alan Sunderland was
Yes.
banging in the goals, including a winner in a cup final.
That's right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Who could forget that haircut? An unforgettable player in all sorts of ways. Yeah, I mean, it was a different time to be watching football in those days. But I mean, so much has changed. It's mad. I mean, I feel like my fandom really kind of kicked into overdrive in the 80s, though, when I was sort of old enough to go by myself. When you're not relying on adults to take you, and you've got that freedom to run around the country like an idiot. It's a fantastic way to spend sort of late teens, and in those days it was affordable, so you could kind of, that wasn't really a barrier to how much football you watch. Getting tickets was fairly easy. You could decide on the day or the day before, unless it was a massive game, you could probably go with your pocket money. And those were like golden times for me.
Yeah, £3.50 it used to cost me in the Clockstand paddocks, which wasn't a bad time. But yeah, going kind of way back. Have you got any early memories of Arsenal taking on Sunderland, or even kind of some memories in your career as a journalist?
Yeah, well, I remember coming up to Roker Park in 1991. It was a game. It was 0-0. I think David Seaman, from memory, made a pretty important save.
It was live on the match, I think.
It was live, which was unusual in those days. Yeah. And it was hugely important to Arsenal because they were going for the title, and it was quite late in the season, and they needed something from the game. I think that was my first time in Sunderland. And we were just really, really excited. And I was very glad that I got to go to Roker. I'm a huge fan of old style stadia, as they used to be, and change happened because it had to. But if I could go in a time machine and watch my football in those environments, what I loved most was that every single ground had its own personality, its own quirks, its own soul. You could like close your eyes and be blindfolded and taken to a ground in those days, and then whipped off the blindfold, and you'd know where you were. Whereas today, as a lot of grounds have a similar sort of architectural feeling.
Yeah.
And, going to, whether it was Roker or the baseball ground or the Dell, they all had their quirky things.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt so exciting to go to all the different places. So, yeah, I was so pleased to have been up there. It was a very, very famous old ground, stood on that terrace behind that away end, and we got our point and went off happy. But it was definitely nice impressions of watching football up there and understanding that there was that kind of special passion in that part of the world, which I probably saw a little bit more closely a few years later when I was sent up to watch Tyne-Wear Derby. And I can tell you exactly when it was. It was 26th of October 2008. I'm going to test your knowledge here, Chris. See if you remember what might have happened before I fill you in.
Which one was that? So that would have been Roy Keane, I guess. Was that the first win?
Correct.
Correct.
Well done.
There you
well
go.
done. And the first words of my report was, "This was emotional chaos."
Sounds perfect.
When 28 years of local bragging rights are turned inside out, it's not altogether surprising that hearts judder and heads are lost. The best part of 50,000 Northern souls boiled over here as Sunderland beat Newcastle at home for the first time in almost 3 decades. And some of it was not pretty. There were skirmishes on the pitch. Both sets of fans who have been on top of each other all game without much of a buffer zone felt the weight of local history.
Yeah. I think Joey Barton returned from he returned from a ban that day, and he was on the bench, I think.
Yeah,
and he went. It was interesting when he came out to warm up, I think, from memory. But
correct. You remember the goal scorer that day? It was 1-0.
Was it? Well, Jibril Cisse scored, didn't he?
Kieran Richardson, I think.
Or was it just a free kick? Oh, I've got them slightly I thought it was 2-1.
It was,
in my
maybe,
head.
it might be.
I thought Dibril Cisse scored and stuck his leg out and
You're
scored the
right.
first, and Richardson scored the second, and we won 2-1.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
Cisse got the opening goal.
I was very scared I was wrong there, but
No, very good.
And I was just going to say that game at Roker Park. I remember it was late April, early May. I think it was our last home game of the season, and it was freezing. It was blowing a gale, and I remember that the cameras went up to Brian Moore and Jimmy Greaves in the crow's nest above the clock stand, on top of the clock stand. And they were wrapped up in blankets and everything. And basically they were just saying, we're freezing up. They just wanted the game to end because it was raining as well. And I think that David Seaman's save was from a Gary Hours shot. I think it was going right in the top corner. And he clawed it out to the top corner. Because I remember, because we were trying to survive a relegation and we ended up going down. But I remember it being an awful game.
It wasn't great.
Absolutely awful game. But I was going to say, it hasn't been a bad ride. So, in your years of supporting Arsenal, I was looking at forgive us for how many seasons, but in the 48 seasons since your first game, I think, finished outside of the top 6 on only 8 occasions. But of course, I mentioned the book you wrote, 89, which is, of course, about that famous title win at Anfield. I mean, has there been, what ranks up there with that? Does that stand alone at the top?
It does for me. Which sounds mad when you think of the successes under Wenger, the style of football, the Invincibles, and so on. I think sometimes the moment that something happens to you in your life, like how old you were, where you were at that point of your life, is a factor when you're trying to measure these things. And the influence, I was 17 and bunked off my last ever day of school to go to Anfield. See my team in the league when it was considered completely impossible. And I just remember a really strange sensation for, that age and that point of my life of thinking, like, life's never going to get any better than this. Like, that's it. I've peaked. And also thinking, don't anyone ever tell me that something's impossible. Because things that are never supposed to happen can happen, because I've seen it with my own eyes. And it was a deeply emotional period because it was only 6 weeks after the Hillsborough disaster. There was an awful lot going on in the football environment at that time. Sort of was very, very heavily loaded with a lot of, important sentiment, and it just felt like such a momentous period and a momentous thing to happen. And I think the madness of it, to basically win the league first against second, winner takes it all in the last seconds of stoppage time of an entire league season. Yeah, it packs an emotional punch that is pretty different. You just don't get things like that very often in your life.
Yeah, and it was always a strange thing. I always wondered why George Graham was calming people down.
You know what? I've discussed that with him, in fact, and I think that a lot of that was to do with the Hillsborough disaster and a feeling of like not like lording it or rubbing it in. But he also sort of said I didn't really know what to do. Like I, lost even my senses a little bit, so wasn't quite sure how to react. I think a few minutes before he'd been sitting there on the bench thinking, "What am I going to say to the press? Like, what am I going to say? How am I going to deal with this?" So yeah, like I said, that I think that's ultimately one of the best examples of why do we all love football? Why do millions of people all around the world have this obsessive relationship with this sport that they can't control? Because it brings us these moments in our lives. It brings us that sense of possibility. It might be once every 30 years. It might. Some clubs suffer a lot more than others. Yeah. But you hang on in there for those moments that make you feel glad to be alive, that are completely different from any other nice moments in your life ordinarily.
Yeah, and of course, with the backdrop of those words from Brian Moore telling us it's up for grabs now. I mean, just absolutely incredible.
Find the biggest voices in sport on the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Like If You Know Your History with me, Johnny Owen.
And with me, Mark Webster. And it's not just any other football pod. We go beyond the goals to uncover the untold stories, the hidden histories, and the cultural moments that shaped the game we love.
Search If You Know Your History and listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
Find the biggest voices in sports on the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Like Football Cliches with Adam Hurrey, Charlie Eccleshare and me, David Walker. It's a truly unique podcast all about the language of football, the words, the phrases and all the tiny things you didn't think you cared about until now. Search Football Cliches and listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
Sports Social Podcast Network. The biggest voices in sport. Let's take a look at some of the lineup. The England pod.
If he plays regular minutes this season at Manchester City, he will re-emerge as one of the best players that we've got.
The final word.
Not sure whether stress fractures were a thing in the mid-70s in the same way that nobody ate avocados until 2005.
Let's be having you.
I love the fact that he's chosen that moment to go, do you know what? Now I'm going to do it.
All on Europe's biggest sport podcast network. Find your next favourite sport podcast. Search Sports Social Podcast Network and listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
Verified comparison at content.sport-social.co.uk/comparison.
But yeah, I mean, I was going to ask about this because one of the strange things about, your time being an Arsenal fan and Arsenal fans in general who've been fans of the club for a long time, completely different to any other club in the fact that during your time since your first game, Arsenal have had 7 managers. Now, if you look, Sunderland have had 7 managers in the last 7 years, just as a comparison. And I think most clubs are probably something similar in terms of those numbers. I mean, is that something that Arsenal fans look at the club and have a sense of pride about?
Definitely. I certainly think it's something that the club itself feel a sense of pride about. They very consciously didn't want to be a club that had a lot of churn. They liked the idea. There was a historical kind of stature of Arsenal where they like to consider that they tried to do things with a touch of class and a bit of dignity. And that goes back to the 1930s and Herbert Chapman and the Marble Halls. And, when the opposition teams came, they would put flowers of their colours and, to welcome in the hallways and things like that. Just little things that they always like to try and do. So I think it's related to that, where they just, particularly I think when Abramovich comes along and the football landscape changes forever in a very, very radical way. And it's all about mega money and, how much can you spend and where's that money coming from? God only knows, or maybe doesn't want to know.
Yeah.
And, managers win trophies and then get sacked straight away. I think they found that quite distasteful. So there's almost a sense of like, we're going to try ever so hard to not be that, to represent something else. And that was hard at a time when the latter period of Arsene Wenger's 22 years, things weren't going so well. There was maybe a bit of disconnect between fans who were a bit more, certainly especially younger ones, more clamouring for change, and to sort of like stiff upper lip from within the club. It was like, well, we don't sack managers, we do things the right way. But yeah, it's a fairly remarkable statistic. Just asking you a question. You've had say you've had 7 in 7 years. How highly would you rate the man of the moment?
I think he found the Championship tough and the Championship strange in a way where he almost kind of went in. He thought he didn't necessarily need too much of a game plan for each side. So he went in with, right, this is how we play, this is how we set up. I think now we're seeing in the Premier League how good he actually is. Because now he's thinking, well, what I'm doing, it's more emphasised in terms of having an advantage, whereas in the Championship, I think it's maybe less so. It's maybe diluted a little bit when coaches, make slight changes and go for a specific game plan. Because in the Premier League, you can see it on the pitch, and I think this season he did a fantastic job taking us up. He had a good squad, but I think he overachieved. But this season, he's really earning his money. He's going to the game plan he had at Crystal Palace. For instance, the game plan he had for Chelsea, that came out of the blue, suddenly went to 5 at the back. When we had a red card against Aston Villa, we were the better side. And for a side who bought 14 in total, I think, but ended up with 13 because Guillou went back to Chelsea, to mould all those players into the system he wants to play within the space of, say, 6 weeks is something incredible, because quite often you see those turnovers in summers don't work. And he's got those together. And every player on the pitch knows their role and knows exactly what they've got to do.
Did you see this coming at all this start? Are you as surprised as people on the outside, do you think?
We didn't see, well, look, nobody at Sunderland would have said Champions League place in mid-November. Absolutely not. But I think when we got these players and we were seeing, because our record signing Diarra hasn't been seen for the last few weeks and won't be seen probably until the new year. And we were seeing the likes of Siddiqui and Diarra and, Michele and Alderete. We were seeing these in pre-season. And we almost went into the start of the season quite quietly confident that because we were starting to predict we might be okay. We might be kind of mid-table and we might not be in the battle at the bottom. So we had that sort of confidence. But I don't think any Sunderland fan would have ever said we'd have a Champions League by mid-November. And when we came to play Arsenal, it would be, two of the, we would be kind of challenging at the top. And I think we're still, if you look at our December, we've got Man City, we've got Liverpool, we've got Newcastle. We're still seeing it as we've accumulated a lot of points to give us a little bit of a buffer. But still, we still have to pick up those points. And in past seasons, we certainly haven't done that. And we ended up playing Everton on Monday night, being disappointed with not going second and getting 3 points at home against a very good side. And if that's not a sign of where you are, then I'm not sure what is. But yeah, absolutely fine. And I'm sure, as you said, I don't think many people in the media kind of, we're still being, I think Jamie Carragher tipped us to go down and a few others did. But I'm not
people
sure.
Are used to assuming that the 3 promoted teams struggle straight away. So that's where...
Rightly so, if you go off evidence.
Exactly. So that's why this season has been so interesting.
Yeah. But I mean, looking back, the last league title was 2003, 2004. That's 21 seasons without a league title, I make it. But 5 FA Cup wins in that time. And I look back on when I was young and Liverpool hadn't won a title for years and years, and they were chasing it. And then Manchester United, when Sir Alex Ferguson got over the line. I mean, does it start feeling something on that scale for Arsenal fans now?
That's a good question. I mean, I remember distinctly that, those long periods for Liverpool and Man United, 23 years, I think it was, Man United didn't win. And, the difference, I suppose, is that, in the modern day, people just don't have perspective ever. Like this kind of instant judgment world that we're in. If Sunderland beat Arsenal on the weekend, there'll be idiots with keyboards that'll be slagging off Arsenal's players or Mikel Arteta, despite the fact they've had an absolutely brilliant start to the season. And it does wind me up a little bit. I do find it hard that people can't seem to grasp nuance of perspective very easily when they're reacting to football. So it's quite exhausting, I think, every single game. There's a sort of extremity of reaction generally. And either you're going to win the league or you're going to get relegated. I mean, it's sort of so ridiculous. I mean, I'm slightly being facetious, but you know what I'm saying.
Oh, I completely agree.
So, look, for me, I'm just really enjoying the moment. Possibly a little bit like you are now. You don't know how long you're going to stay up in these kind of elevated positions, but I think when you've watched football a long time and you know that a lot of it is either really mundane or really worrying and disappointing and frustrating and difficult. And, unless you support a very specific type of club, those moments of wonder are quite few and far between. And they're also never guaranteed. And I get very frustrated also with people who say, well, if Arteta doesn't win now, he must go. Because what that suggests is that there's not other teams who are at least in the same position of like aiming to try and win a big prize. And when you look at the Prem, there's at least 5 or 6 teams who are aiming for that. So there's 4 teams who are going to be disappointed. You don't just sack those 4 people because they haven't done it.
Yeah.
And similarly, for the Champions League, even more so, you've got, maybe 8 teams who think they might win the Champions League. And what you're going to do, sack the other 7 managers that don't do it? It's just laughable to me. You have to be able to respect the job that someone's doing within that context.
Yeah.
And I think Arteta's done a phenomenal job over the last, few years. And, obviously I'd be euphoric if that comes to the rewards.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't, they'll have given it their best shot. And I don't believe that should be a drama. And I also don't like this idea, well, if you've spent that much, therefore you must win, because that's not really relevant either. Every transfer is a human, and every human has ups and downs, and nothing is guaranteed. So you just hope that you can do enough of the good stuff to get your rewards every now and again. I try and be philosophical about it.
Well, you mentioned Champions League, and of course, Arsenal played midweek and had to travel to Slavia Prague, and of course got a really good win. Is that something Mikel Arteta takes into account? Because obviously you're really chasing this league, and kind of turned on that Newcastle United game, does he take that into account in terms of resting players, rotating players? Or does he just simply expect Arsenal just to not miss a beat and carry on into the Premier League after a game like that?
Well, I think the benefits of having a Tuesday early kickoff in the Champions League have been helpful on this account. So, for example, they were able to travel back on Tuesday night, whereas theoretically, if you have a late kickoff on a Wednesday, they would have probably stayed the night and not travelled back till Thursday, which cuts it pretty fine for preparations for a Saturday game. So, I think it is a balancing act, and that's why they've tried to put together this, quite elite, heavyweight, in-depth squad. It's definitely the most deep and rounded squad that I can remember at Arsenal, like possibly even ever. Yeah. In terms of that, you could almost pick 2 11s. That's taking it a bit far.
Yeah.
But there's much less gap between, what you might consider the first pick and the second pick in each position. And there's some positions where really it's an either or and you can flip a coin. So that's it's been a long time coming, and they've had to work very hard to put themselves in that position. But it still doesn't stop you from having problems. So they've got I think 8 out, of which nearly all of them are forwards. Yeah. At the moment, which is the frustration, because when Gyökeres went down injured last weekend at Burnley, the first thought in my head was not that bothered about Slavia Prague. I think we should manage, but I'd really like him or Martinelli to be available for Sunderland, because that's such a tough assignment. And the way it's turned out, neither of them will be, and none of the ones that they're waiting to come back. The cavalry are all coming back after the international break, so it's probably a good time for Sunderland from that point of view, because Arsenal are going to go up there with still a very strong starting 11. But if they need to change things around and they need a goal, there's not a lot of experience in attack on the bench. We've played a 15-year-old and 17-year-old in midweek who are both fantastic players who acquitted themselves well, but in a very, very tough away game in the Prem, ideally speaking, you wouldn't mind having one of Martinelli or Kai Havertz or Gyökeres or Gabby Jesus or Odegaard or Noni Madueke. It's quite a long list of absentees. So it's really on the main starters, which I expect to be Saka, Trossard, Marino might play up front, Eza. Those are the guys they've sort of got to deliver for Arsenal, because if someone's having an off day or misses a chance, there's it's not like there's a lot of obvious changes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I'm going back a long time, but I remember the days under Peter Reid, especially when we used to try and get under the skin of Arsenal players when they travelled north, especially to the stadium. Like I remember Tony Adams being sent off, Patrick Vieira sent off up at Sunderland.
That's right, yeah.
But is this Arsenal side different? Will the kind of will they stand up to tactics like that now?
Well, you mentioned Tony Adams, so I'll tell you a story that I always liked that summed up that kind of old school sentiment in football. Tony used to have a phrase which was, "You need 7." And what he meant by that was that you look around at your teammates on the pitch and you need 7 who will have a fight for you. Otherwise, forget it. But I think that was an appropriate number. Maybe, you could carry a few back in the late 80s or early 90s. I think 7 is nowhere near enough anymore. So I think you need much more like 9 or 10. But this Arsenal team actually do have, a very, very competitive bunch of very professional, very hungry players who are really serious about what they're doing. There's not a lot that they're carrying at the moment, and you'd back most of them to, stand up for you if you needed a hand for one reason or another.
Yeah.
I remember not that long ago when things were really very apathetic around Arsenal. That can't remember a specific game, but someone getting bullied or someone getting a bad tackle, and like nobody going up and standing up for their teammates, and that was really hard to take. I don't know if you can think of similar feeling at some points with Sunderland, but that's probably one of the hardest things as a supporter, that you look at your team and someone out there suffering and no one's backing them up. Whereas I think this lot, if you take one, you take them all on, kind of thing. So it's a slightly different atmosphere. The fact they're not giving up chances, never mind giving up goals very often, is a testament to the fact that they are really in a sort of certain zone psychologically. That they might not be. When you think about trying to win the league and stuff, and you look at Erling Haaland, and you look at the fact that Liverpool, have assembled some of the most expensive forward players in the world all in one team. It's a lot to come up against. But Arsenal are they're trying to do it by making sure first things first, that no one's getting in.
Yeah, well, I was
Bouncers on the door.
Yeah,
and then you see what happens after that.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because it don't seem swashbuckling. Last 4 games, 2-0, 1-0, 1-0, 2-0. I mean, you're going almost back to the George Graham days. I mean,
but that's fine. I don't mind that. But yeah, I mean, I think I wouldn't. I'm not critical of that. I know some people are. If you, it's like that old Beastie Boys. So you got to fight for the right to party. You got to make sure you're okay in that environment first. Then you can relax and express yourself. If you're in a position where you can go out and play pretty football and rack up the goals, everybody's going to be delighted. But if that's not on the table, and with 7 or 8 attacking players out, that's quite hard. You just got to do what you can to win a game of football, get the points, go home.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at this point, I want to just raise Granit Xhaka because he spoke straight after the Everton game and said how much he's looking forward to playing Arsenal because he still knows a lot of people, still got a lot of affection for the club. How do Arsenal fans look at Granit Xhaka's time at Arsenal?
Wow, that's a big question. I would like to think that the very, very vast majority absolutely love him and respect him. There might, like all these things, you can't, I think with fans, there's always a danger of saying the fans think this or the fans think that, because you're talking about, several thousand different people with different ideologies. You're never going to get universality of opinion on anything. But I would say there might be the very, very tiniest amount of people who still go, I should never have, a captain should never be throwing the armband down or you throw the shirt down, it's a line of no return. But I would say that is minuscule proportions, and the vast majority look at him with love, affection, respect. The way, his redemption arc, which was the description that everybody used towards the end of his time at Arsenal, was really beautiful. He is a complex guy. He's an emotional guy. He's a spontaneous guy. He'll give you everything. He's got unbelievably high standards, and he sets them with himself and others around him. And if you don't like that, he'll tell you or he'll show it. And I think he's a special character. And it was just like it was funny. The funny thing is, he was kind of the lightning rod for a lot of wider problems around Arsenal at that time. So I'm not saying it could have been anyone or it could have been anything, but it was a useful trigger that unleashed a lot of different stuff that was going on.
Yeah, well, he's definitely.
But he's a top person, and he's much loved by a lot of people at Arsenal. And I think people are really pleased to see him doing so well, and also regard what he's doing as a fairly obvious stepping stone that sooner or later he's going to, go into coaching and be, I think, probably a really, really good coach as well.
Yeah, I think that's the main reason he came to Sunderland. I think he's on that pathway, I think. But yeah, I mean, I'm just a last point, because I'm just thinking about the majority of Arsenal fans. They've just beaten Burnley away. Even though Sunderland are riding high, will they just think we're going to a newly promoted side? This should be 3 points.
Absolutely not. I think everyone's a bit fearful of this one. Much, much more so than Burnley. Partly because Sunderland have been doing so well. And partly because there's a little bit of worry about, running out of scorers. The set piece thing is great and it's ridiculous, but these things can't go on forever. You can't be guaranteed. So I think because of when it comes as well with the international break following and knowing that there's a load of players that are due back afterwards, I think there's much more of a sort of hope that Arsenal will go up and just, as they have been, just get the job done and then be able to kind of almost close the chapter of the first, period of the season before the kind of real winter slog starts, and players come back and then kind of go again. So I do not think anybody will be going up there in any way expecting, an easy 3 points. No chance. I certainly don't think Mikel Arteta and his coaching staff and players will. I think they'll know that this is going to be, one of the bigger tests. But you kind of, what it's like with these things. You need something to go for you a bit sometimes. But they'll just be hoping to try and kind of carry on in the vein that they're in. They're very, very determined collectively. But whether that's enough, you guys are gonna ask questions as well. So let's see.
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting place to leave it because we've kept you way longer than we intended. So I do apologise, Amy. But just a last point: will you be covering? Are you going up to cover the game?
I'm not actually. Annoyingly, you may have experienced this in your travels of your own, but the British rail system has never been so challenging, I'd say, for ordinary football fans. And there's no trains at all. So everybody I know that is going is, you got to drive or take the coat, or it being the late kickoff and so on, it's a tricky one. So, no, I'm not, but I'll be there in spirit and I'll be watching, and I hope to be back sooner or later.
Good stuff. Well, considering you're travelling, I hope you have a fantastic weekend. Obviously, other than the results, of course, but I'm bound to say that. But yeah, I hope you enjoy the game and have a fantastic weekend.
Cheers, and enjoy the rest of the season. It looks like a fun ride, so keep it that way.
So far, so good. Let's see how it goes. But thanks again, Emily. Appreciate it.
Cheers, Chris.
Good stuff. And thanks again for everyone for listening. Don't forget, we'll have immediate reaction after the final whistle that should drop very soon after, and we'll have all the reaction on the Roker Report website, so look out for all of that. But from us, bye for now.
Podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Find the biggest voices in sport on the Sports Social Podcast Network. Like Big Kick Energy with me, Maisie Adam.
And me, Susie Ruffle.
Each week we bring you the latest from the world of women's football. Whether you're a lifelong fan like me,
or a newer fan like me and have recently got swept up in the Lioness excitement,
we've got everything you need to know about the women's game.
Search Big Kick Energy and listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Sports Social Podcast Network.